Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's training on the 2020 census, what you and your clients need to know. This training is presented by Switchboard, a one-stop resource hub for refugee service providers in the United States. My name is Meg Gibbon and I'm Switchboard's Deputy Director. I'm joined by a co-host today, Rebecca Mull, who is Switchboard's Administration and IT Manager. You'll be hearing from Rebecca in the chat throughout today's training. I'll start by saying that today's webinar will be recorded. The recording will be posted on the Switchboard website and you will receive a link via Zoom email to that recording in exactly 24 hours. Then the webinar transcript will be added to the site in the next few days. Let me quickly review a few logistics here in Zoom. So all attendees are currently muted. You can switch between phone and computer audio at any time. You have the audio settings in the bottom left for that. We absolutely welcome your comments, your questions throughout today's training. The chat bubble is located in the bottom center of your screen. Open that up and send your chat message to all panelists and all attendees so that we are able to view what you've typed out. To test that out now, I'd like to ask that if you're participating in today's training with more than one colleague, but you're using a single computer, so you're joining in a group setting, please type your names and your organization into the chat so that we know who is joining today. If you'd like to raise your hand to request the ability to unmute your line during our Q&A period, you have that option as well, also in the bottom center of your screen. We'll hold questions until our Q&A panel at the end. So for today's learning objectives, we're hoping that by the end of today's webinar, you'll be able to answer frequently asked questions from refugee clients about the 2020 census, that you'll be able to describe why the census is important, including how it impacts federal funding for programs and services, and that you'll be able to name at least one idea for census outreach or education that you can incorporate into your work. We have a really fabulous panel of speakers lined up for today's training. To start us off, Jenny Aramony of the U.S. Census Bureau will open up with an overview about the 2020 census. Kristen, Aster, and Amber Mull will follow that with recommendations and resources for refugee service providers related to census outreach and education. And then lastly, Terry Fisher of the Philadelphia Regional Census Center and Felicia Castricone of Catholic Charities, Onondaga County, will share some examples of census activities being done with refugees in Baltimore and Syracuse. And then to wrap up, we'll conclude with a Q&A panel. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny to get started.
Thanks, Meg. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to do this. Okay, so I will start with some highlights of the 2020 census. The census is required by our Constitution. Remember that Census Day is in less than a month, April 1st, 2020. And this is our reference date, and we want to count you where you are on that date. So anyone arriving to America after this date should not fill out the census. Your data cannot be shared with anyone, including other federal agencies like ICE and the FBI. And your responses can only be used to produce statistics. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so why is the 2020 census important? So it affects congressional representation. Some states will gain or lose seats in the House. Public funding decisions, for example, which hospitals or schools need more federal funding. Community services, such as if medical translators are needed, or if there are ESOL classes that are needed in schools. And businesses also use our data to plan their next investment, like where to open a restaurant. Okay, next slide, please. So these are some of the programs that rely heavily on census statistics: Medicare, SNAP, housing assistance, school programs like Head Start. Okay, moving on. So here are some of the hard to count populations. Our research shows that they have a low willingness to participate in the 2020 census. And some of the reasons why there is a language barrier, they don't trust the government, and they don't know how census benefits them. And this is where we need your help. Young children under the age of 5 was the most undercounted in 2010. So please remind your clients to put their children on the form. And we are working with trusted voices such as yours to reach out to immigrant communities and minority populations. Okay, moving on. So this is the 2020 census questionnaire. It will include 10 easy basic questions, such as how many people are living in your house as of April 1st, 2020, whether the home is owned or rented, the name, sex, age, date of birth, and the race of each person. Okay. So these are the languages listed in order of need, from the top to the bottom, left to the right. These languages were determined by using the 2016 American Community Survey estimates to identify language groups with a high number of limited English-speaking households. This means no member 14 years and over speaks only English at home, or speaks a language other than English at home and speaks English very well. On the left-hand side, you will see the 12 non-English languages for the internet self-response and phone assistance. On the right side, you will see the 59 languages that we have support through video and print guides. And if you need help, you can respond in person when a census taker visits your house, and we will have census takers available who can communicate in additional languages. Okay, moving on. So this is some screenshots I took of the print guides. On the left side, it will be the English question, and on the right side will be the translated version. Okay, and on the bottom of that link with the website, you can find other languages. And this is the internet self-response page, and this will open mid-March. You can use your census ID that will be included on the postcard you will receive in the mail. But you can also respond without the ID using putting in your address. Okay, moving on. So this is the mail out schedule, and the first mail out is in about a week. We will send a couple reminder letters if you haven't responded. The Census Bureau projects that over 60% of American households will respond by May. The remaining 40% will be contacted through personal visits in early May. Okay, moving on. So non-response follow-up. This is the most expensive component of the census. This will start in May 2020 and will run until July. And really the best way to avoid a visit from a census taker is to respond online, by phone, or by mail as soon as you receive your postcard to participate. And if you need to verify these census takers' identities, you can check to make sure they have a valid ID badge with their photograph, U.S. Department of Commerce watermark with an expiration date. Census workers may also carry bags and other equipment with the census logo. And census employees will never ask you for your social security number, money, or donations, or for bank or credit card numbers. And if you still have questions about the identity, you may contact your regional census center on the 2020census.gov. And if the census taker knocks on your door, please cooperate. Your community needs your response. Also, Census Bureau staff will also visit events and locations where people naturally gather in low responding areas to help people submit their responses. Okay, moving on. So this is our campaign timeline. We are currently in the awareness phase. We want to bring as much attention to the 2020 census as possible. You should be seeing our ads on your favorite TV shows and even showing up on your social media now. We will quickly move into the motivation phase next week. This ties with our mail out. We want to encourage everyone to respond. You could do it online, by phone, or by mail. Then comes our reminder phase. We want to tell people it's not too late to respond and to inform people of census takers that might be coming in their neighborhoods. Okay, next please. So I want to wrap things up by just mentioning the 3 important things that we want you to remember. It is easy, safe, and important. We want to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. Okay, and next slide, please. So please connect with us on our social media pages. We share, use our hashtag 2020 census. And if you're interested in partnering with us, you can use the first link if you're a national organization. If you're a state or local organization, you could use the second link. and my email is at the bottom if you want to send me any other questions. Thank you for your time, and I'm going to pass it on to Kristen now.
Thanks so much, Jenny. And I see that there's already been a few good questions in the chat. We'll make sure to cover questions at the end, but I did want to reinforce that this sample questionnaire that Jenny showed a screenshot of is available online. And as Rebecca said, we'll make sure to send that link around so that folks can take a look at it because it is available. Can you go back? Sorry, Rebecca, thanks. So as Meg mentioned, my name is Kristen Aster. I work for the International Rescue Committee. I'm our Associate Director of Community Mobilization and Engagement. The IRC is a Census 2020 partner and have really appreciated working with Jenny and her colleagues as we've had questions about the census. So really encourage all of you as you have questions locally or nationally to be in touch with your census partnership team. So next slide. So we're going to do a poll, and as you can see, the questions are, has your organization taken steps to include census outreach or education in your work with refugee clients? Yes, we have taken steps. Yes, we've taken some steps. No, not yet, or unsure. So the poll should have come up, and we'll give it a few moments for folks to respond to the poll. So we see responses coming in. Great, and the results came in, so great to see that nearly half, 44%, have taken some steps. About a quarter of folks on the line today haven't engaged yet, and then a little less than a quarter have done extensive work, which is great, and then a portion of folks are not sure. So it sounds like we have a great mix on the line today that folks can share some of their best practices and things that are working, but that many of us, if not all of us, have some things to learn. So great, thanks so much for sharing the results. Go to the next slide. So just to reinforce what Jenny said, it's really an opportune moment that you all are on the line today because we're now in March. And so starting March 12th, most households will start to receive information in the mail at their home about completing the census. And that self-response period, so that period where you can complete the census via mail or online or over the phone, will go through the end of April. And then after that point, as Jenny said, there'll be census enumerators going to households seeking follow-up in person. And again, to reinforce, especially for us on the line today, since the focus of today's webinar is on refugee service providers, folks who arrive after April 1st do not complete the census. So whether that's refugees who are resettled after April 1st, or asylum seekers that arrive after April 1st. We'll talk about asylum seekers in the Q&A a little bit. April 1st is really that cutoff point by which folks should respond, or I should say cutoff point by which folks should have arrived should respond. So next slide, and April 1st, 2020, that is correct. Great. And as Rebecca just shared in the chat, there are some nuances in terms of the exact timing and the exact types of information different counties around the country receive. So you can go to the website she provided, the Census Bureau Response Outreach Area Mapper, ROAM. It's pretty technical, but if any of you are doing extensive work and kind of in the weeds, that'll give you more information. So what is the role of refugee service providers? So we think of it in three ways. One, of course, we have a strong imperative to support our clients. As refugee service providers, we know that refugees are fleeing situations where they didn't want to be on the radar of their government, that in many cases their claim to political persecution is because they were fleeing government persecution. And so we know that refugees in particular have particular barriers to responding to a government tracking and data collection mechanism like the census. It's just not going to be familiar or comfortable for many of our clients. So we really have a duty as refugee service providers to be able to be equipped to respond to questions that will come up from clients and to be able to talk them through what the census is and why it's important. Also, in terms of our role engaging with communities, this is an important opportunity to show all of the communities where we work that we're committed to serving the greater good of the entire community. So we're serving refugees and other immigrants, but we also strongly believe in the importance of making sure the communities where we work get the resources that they need from the federal government and state governments and elsewhere. As Jenny said, the census impacts resources, our representation. It's also a civic duty of our clients that is connected to the rights and protections they have to be a part of civic processes. So again, we really have a unique and important role to make sure our clients understand what the census is and that they are equipped to do it. We also know that trusted messengers are really important. As Jenny shared, immigrants, minority populations, folks who don't speak English as their native language, all our communities that tend to be undercounted in the census. And so we as refugee service providers are those trusted messengers that can really help educate folks about the importance and how to respond. Next slide. So how can you do this? So we'll talk about a few ideas over the next few minutes. You can see some ideas on the screen. As Jenny mentioned, this is the first time that the census will be available online. So one idea could be in your lobby, you could have a laptop or a desktop or a tablet by which folks coming to your office could take time to complete the census or get other information in the census. Also, the Census Bureau is hiring many folks around the country to be enumerators, to be those census takers. And as Jenny shared, really looking for folks who have unique language ability. And so recruitment is ongoing for that. And there has been a waiver put in place where non-citizens can apply for census jobs. Also, as we all know, it's really effective to incorporate resources in existing programming and activities you might have going on. So you can share those census resources in all of the languages. You can connect with your local complete count committees, which are bodies that are working to make sure that communities around the country have a fair and accurate count and have local strategies and messages. And then we'll be sharing in a moment some of the multilingual flyers and postcards that are available. Next slide. So as Rebecca shared in the chat, and you can see on your screen, so one resource that the IRC put together is a flyer and postcard that Switchboard has kindly made available and customizable in case it's of interest in your organization to use. We translated the flyer into 10 and the postcard into 10 non-English languages, and this was based on our assessment of languages that are most frequently spoken by our clients, and also looking at some of the gaps for which census resources might not be available. And again, to the point that trusted messengers are so important in this process and why it's so important that different organizations are involved. You have an opportunity to put your own logo on there, again, to be that trusted messenger and use these resources in your outreach. Next slide. So these are some potential questions that might come up as you're engaging with clients about completing the census. And again, we'll have extensive time for Q&A at the end, and I see some good questions continuing to come in that I'll note. But just briefly, some of the questions that have come up already: do I complete the census if I'm not a US citizen? Yes, the census counts everyone living here in the United States. You heard Jenny talk about how the census asks basic information about name, address, number of people living there, race, sex, date of birth, etc. Not social security numbers, not credit card info. So it's good for us all to have our eye out for potential fraud or disinformation. You'll have multiple opportunities to respond throughout this process in different modes, depending on what makes you comfortable: in writing, phone, online, in person. The information is safe, so it is, as Jenny said, it's prohibited by law for anyone's personal information to be shared with law enforcement or ICE or other government agencies. And there are also mechanisms in place, I'm sure Jenny can talk about more, to prevent hacking or other sorts of security breaches. Is it more secure to complete the census on paper than online? Again, it's safe and secure, but really up to the respondents how folks would like to respond. And there are census resources available in many languages. It doesn't cover all languages, which again reinforces the importance of refugee service providers to be a resource in case there are language gaps as folks have questions. So next slide. So before we move to talking a little bit more into some of the ideas for how to use these resources, we'll have a discussion question that you can type your answer in the chat. So this question is, imagine a client comes to you with concerns about completing the census. She is uncomfortable providing her information to the US government. What might you tell her? We'll give you a moment to think about what might you say, and again, add your responses to the chat. Any thoughts anyone wants to share in the chat what you might say? Confidential, how it'll benefit her, safe, secure, and simple, strictly for the Census Bureau, doesn't share information. Great, understanding of concerns. I like that point. You're not a US citizen, so you're not eligible to vote, but this is another way to make your voice heard and get involved. Won't be shared with others, confidential. Already seen this question come up, funding, etc. Yeah, lots of great responses. So again, your information will be safe. The census does not share your personal information with anyone, not others in the government or the police. It's against the law. Asked basic information, not social security numbers or financial information. And then really enforcing those resources. It sounds like many of you have done. And we've seen that a lot in message testing, that really reinforcing how these resources impacts government resources for schools and hospitals and transportation, housing, jobs, really make a difference. And that everyone is required to respond regardless of immigration status. Great. Yeah, lots of good questions. Thanks so much for sharing. So now I'm going to shift it over to my colleague Amber, who's going to talk a little bit more about ways to incorporate this into your work. Amber, over to you.
Thank you, Kristen, and hi, everyone. It's great to join you all today. I'm the Associate Director for Immigration for IRC. And as Kristen said, we'll be delving into some other ways to integrate this into programming. First, though, we did want to address one specific fear that people may have, which is around the citizenship question. There will not be a citizenship question on the census. The administration originally wanted to include it and did so on test questionnaires that were released in July of 2019, but a subsequent Supreme Court decision removed the question. But there still could be fears around, I'm not a citizen, how will this impact me? But we can just reinforce that there is no question about immigration status on it, and that all people, regardless of immigration status, can be counted on the census. Next slide. So as a refugee agency, we all have cultural orientation, and this is a great place to integrate information on the census and inform our clients about it. Participation in the U.S. Census is a way to introduce newly arrived refugees and other immigrants to the role of the U.S. government in their new communities. Clients may not necessarily be familiar with the purpose of the census or may have reservations about participating in one. So CO can be a good touch point to help clarify the process and address any concerns that may arise. This includes going ahead and letting folks know that there could be door-to-door census enumerators coming at some point in the process and what to expect. Again, going over some of those things that Kristen expounded on about what will and will not be asked are great places. Also, having people practice the census questions. There's an informational questionnaire from the Census Bureau that can be used, and integrating census activities for adult ESL students into lesson plans, making that connection between the census and the community, between the census and the US government. It can also help clients build digital literacy skills, which are needed to complete the census online. And that takes us to the next slide, please. And some of the digital literacy skills needed are basic skills, computer functions, turning off and on, clicking, navigating through things. This can be a great learning opportunity to really have a hands-on approach to using digital literacy skills in a way that, again, connects with the community and in a meaningful way. However, if a client is not able to complete one or more of these tasks, there are these other ways that they complete the census, by the mail or over the phone, and that might be another more appropriate way if they are not comfortable online. Some of the simple digital literacy skills required for the online platform are very repetitive, so staff and volunteers can sit with a client and provide guidance without taking control of the mouse or the computer to help reinforce these digital skills. It's important to keep in mind here that staff and volunteers and interns may not actually type in clients' responses into the online census. Only Census Bureau employees may collect those responses directly from the individuals, and they are under an oath of confidentiality. Census Bureau employees are sworn for life under the law to keep those responses confidential. But this is a great opportunity to integrate this into any digital literacy or computer skills classes that might be going on. Great. So another place to think about integrating information on the census is through immigration programs. And immigration practitioners and programs are often working with refugees, asylees, and other immigrants who have been in the country for 1 year to 5 years after arrival. So this is a great opportunity to reach former resettled refugees who might be a little bit outside of that typical RMP process, and to be able to inform them on the census as they will also be participating. This fits in nicely with education on civics classes and can be introduced in the curriculum, as well as in information sessions or Know Your Rights presentations, any type of community outreach or engagement that's happening with immigration programs. Census can be integrated into that. Flyers can be easily distributed through partners and through office appointments. And in particular, immigration practitioners are great messengers to address some of the questions about immigration status, about confidentiality, and the citizenship question. So it's a great place to be able to loop these questions and this information in with programming. Always, of course, the last bullet point, making sure that clients and community members know that census data will not be shared with immigration, customs, and customs enforcement with ICE, with USCIS, or any other agencies related to immigration or status. Next slide, please. So those are a few kind of big topic ideas. Looking at your programs, looking at the way that you can integrate some of these resources and materials into them is a great next step. There are also some other suggested next steps that we have here. One is to designate a main point of contact for census outreach within your office or organization, just to be able to coordinate, to streamline efforts, and to make sure that communication is flowing, resources are getting to where they need. Second, connect with your local complete count committee. These committees may or may not already be formed or accepting new members, but just having that communication with them and knowing particular gaps in your community, how you can collaborate, can be very meaningful, and to highlight the work that you're doing so that when there are opportunities, you can help weigh in and inform how refugees are being connected with the census. Train your teams on the census. Depending on staffing in your office, you may want to look at specific programs to integrate census information. Those staff need to be aware of these basic scenarios, anticipate questions, and be able to get information to clients as needed. Print and post flyers and postcards around the census. There are these materials that are posted on Switchboard that you have access to that can allow you to respond to inquiries from clients and communities. And then track your census activities. This would be important to show your impact, to show what's happening in your community, and be able to adjust as needed throughout the timeline of the census to be able to reach people and have the most impact. So if we go to the next slide, it shows some recommended resources for these activities and for your programming. These links will appear in the chat and also be emailed. But Kristen already talked about the outreach flyer and the postcard the IRC developed, which Switchboard is kindly making available. Those are in the different languages. You can access those, download them, distribute them. The census also has a wealth of materials. They have language guides in 60 languages, activities and lesson plans that can be used in ESL adult education, our civics programming, and the informational questionnaire so that clients can see what the questions are. They can practice filling it out before they go online or before they transfer it onto that mailer. There's a lot of resources out there for different organizations with the Census Bureau, and so linking in and tapping into some of these through your office point of contact is a great way to start thinking about how best to integrate census into your current programming with your staffing. Thank you. So now I'll turn it over to Terry and Felicia.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry Fisher. I'm a partnership specialist with the U.S. Census Bureau here in Baltimore City. And I'd like to just share briefly with you an initiative that we've actually implemented to encourage participation from our immigrant residents here in the city for the 2020 census. Next slide, please. Baltimore City's population is just over 600,000 residents, and we have a little over 49,000 foreign-born residents, which accounts for about 8% of our city's population. And among our foreign-born residents, there are about 20,000 from Latin America, a little over 8,000 from Nigeria. And of those residents, many of them speak English as a second language. Therefore, it is imperative that we enumerate all of our immigrant residents for the 2020 census so that we can appropriately align federal funding to support linguistic and other services that our immigrant residents depend on each and every day. And one of the ways that we are working to address the prevalent distrust of government here in Baltimore City among our immigrant and urban communities is by working with organizations that promote and that provide services, needed services to these populations. And in turn, they become what's called trusted voices, as was mentioned earlier. We've actually identified about 75 civic groups, faith-based institutions, nonprofits, and other educational institutions to partner with. Next slide. And one of the organizations that I actually like to highlight today is the Baltimore City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, or MEMA for short. MEMA works to improve quality of life for immigrant residents here in Baltimore City by encouraging and supporting economic development and working to also identify and address the needs of our immigrant residents here in the city. What is also unique about MEMA's mission is that they also identify opportunities that immigrant residents bring to the city as well. Now, MEMA was actually founded in 2013 under the leadership of Mayor Stephanie Rollins Blake, and also the New American Task Force, which was a group of stakeholders that actually convened at that particular time. The Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs is a key organization to support immigrants here in Baltimore City, but they also play a very, very vital role in ensuring that our immigrant residents get appropriately represented for the 2020 census. Catalina Rodriguez is the director of MEMA, and she is a part of our Baltimore City Complete Count Committee. And just for your edification, a Complete Count Committee is a consortium of volunteers from state and local government, nonprofit organizations business entities, and everyday residents that really work to leverage the resources they have to ensure that 2020 census education and awareness is spread throughout the city of Baltimore. MEMA's role on our Complete Count Committee will also be to identify neighborhoods where our immigrant residents reside and to strategize and understand the linguistic services that will be required to appropriately enumerate them. Next slide, please. The Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs website provides targeted 2020 census outreach materials. They have a toolkit. They've actually adopted resources from the U.S. Census Bureau partnership outreach landing page to create tailored messaging regarding the need to count all residents, confidentiality, which is very, very important to our immigrant communities, counting children 0 to 5, and the 2020 census timeline, so that our immigrant residents can understand each and be prepared for each phase of the 2020 census initiative that is actually taking place as we move into our motivation phase. The toolkit is also available in English and 7 other additional non-speaking English-speaking languages, which include Spanish, French, Chinese, Korean, Arabic, Swahili, and Tigrinya. Next slide, please. So we've been able to actually stimulate interest among our immigrant and urban communities here in Baltimore as it relates to the 2020 census by introducing possibilities of 2020 census job opportunities. And so we've been working along with the Baltimore City Area Census Office. Again, for your edification, the Baltimore City Area Census Office is the command center for the non-response follow-up, which will be actually starting in May. And also they're actually responsible for the 2020 census employment opportunities recruitment efforts. And so we were actually just trying to brainstorm ways in which we could get our immigrant communities more heavily involved in the 2020. And so when we actually found out about the appropriations law, which will allow non-US citizens that are legally entitled to work in the United States to apply for translator positions, we thought it might be a good idea to host a Baltimore City immigrant citywide 2020 census jobs information session. So the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, our Complete Count Committee, and the U.S. Census Bureau all collaborated to bring the information session to South Baltimore on January 25th. Just recently, at the beginning of the year, the job information session was actually held at our Southeast Anchor Library. And the library actually resides in a community that is heavily laden with immigrant residents here in Baltimore City. And we considered the event to be extremely successful. We thought we'd probably get about 40 participants at the most. But we actually had over 80 local residents in attendance with very, very diverse backgrounds. And so we're always strategizing and brainstorming ways in which we can ameliorate the distrust among our immigrant and urban communities. And this Baltimore City Immigrant Citywide Job Fair was just one of the many efforts that we're implementing here in Baltimore to get our immigrant communities involved, to educate them about the importance of the 2020 census and why it's easy, why it's safe, and why it's important. But to also offer many local residents here in Baltimore City who are unemployed and underemployed with potential employment opportunities. Our Baltimore City ACO will be actually planning to hire 1,600 local residents here in the city of Baltimore. They've actually surpassed their recruitment goal. I believe they're at about 120.8% of their recruitment goal. So they've far surpassed creating a hiring pool. And so now we're working to reach out to residents to bring them into the ACO for interviews. And we're fully staffing our ACO so that, again, we can ensure that the non-response follow-up operation is appropriately carried out here in Baltimore City, that our group quarters operation is appropriately carried out. And that's another very important operation, as we'll be counting our homeless population as well. And so I'd just like to thank you all for allowing me to share one of the strategies that we're using to incorporate our immigrant communities in the 2020 census process. And I bid you all the best of luck and congratulate you on your hard work towards making sure that our immigrant communities are enumerated for the 2020 census here in the United States. And I'll pass it on to my colleague, my next presenter.
Hello, everyone. This is Felicia. So we got involved at Catholic Charities with the census activities back in the summer of 2019. We joined our local Complete Count Committee, and we've been working with them ever since. And they have a real commitment here in Onondaga County to getting to those hard to count populations, but I think with a particular focus on getting to the new American populations as one of the hard to count populations. So they've been very open to anything that we can offer in terms of reaching those populations, reassuring everyone that it's safe to complete their census questionnaire. So we started back in January with information sessions. We worked with a US Census Bureau representative who came out and actually gave the presentation to refugees. We incorporated refugees from our citizenship classes, refugees who come here for case management and other activities. And we're across the street from the largest English language school in Syracuse. So we actually invited the teachers to bring their classes over to go to the presentation. So we were able to get a really good group of people here just to get information about what the census is, that it is safe, what to expect when they would start receiving those cards. We have another set of information sessions coming up very soon here in March, now that we're in March. This will be very similar to the first set of information sessions, but we will be giving those sessions as people are receiving their cards, so they'll have a little bit more knowledge about what to look for, and we want to encourage them to watch their mail for those cards. And then as soon as people have received their cards and their ID numbers and can actually fill out the census questionnaire, we'll be holding census clinics. So an opportunity for refugees and other people in the community. So we're not only opening our doors to refugees, but anybody who might not have access to a computer, who just wants to come down and use our computers. We have 18 computers in a computer room that we started several years ago with a grant from the New York State Office of New Americans. And so they are also working on the census initiatives in New York State. So we'll be using those computers. There's always quite a few free during the day, and they can come down and complete their census form right here at our agency. We'll also, besides those census clinics, which we expect to hold about twice a week during the prime census period, we will allow people to just walk in with their card and try to assist them as much as possible in filling out the form. We won't always have, a census taker on site, so we'll try not to cross that line of filling it out for them, but just to give them access to the computers and make sure they understand the questions. We have interpreters in the building all the time. I think we have staff interpreters and staff members who speak about 15 or 20 languages here. So we can help in that educational and interpretation piece. And then on Census Day, 4/1/20, we'll be holding sort of events at each site. So here at Catholic Charities, CYO, which is where our refugee resettlement program is, but we're also hoping to hold events at our preschool programs and We have a program that serves the elderly, so other sites throughout Catholic Charities. And these will be kind of the fun party days. You know, there'll be refreshments and kind of a day to come and fill out your census form. And again, the computers will be open and available for people. Next slide, please. We recently were given the opportunity to apply for a local grant to fund some of our activities, and it would fund some of the outreach workers who would go out and talk to people about the census, as well as a couple of computers that they could carry with them so people could use their computer to complete the census form if they didn't have one in the home. These grants would also fund refreshments for the celebrations on April 1st. We won't find out until next week, actually, if we receive one of those grants. And our intention is to move forward with everything, whether or not we get a grant. But if we do get a grant, we'll be able to do a little bit more and spread our activities out throughout Syracuse and work with some of the other hard to count populations that we hadn't planned to here at CYO, which is refugee based and refugee focused. We were just focusing on the refugee population, but if we get a grant, we do expect to extend those outreach activities to other populations. We're trying to use, to reach the most people, we're trying to use things that are already happening. So we already have quite a few people coming for citizenship classes. As I said, the English classes are across the street, so we can easily access those people. People come here for help reading their mail. They come here to meet with case managers. So we're hoping to use sort of their natural times that they come to the center to help them complete their forms. We have parenting classes. We're hoping to use those to reach some people. We have fresh food giveaways, which are actually in the main Catholic Charities building. That's another place where we feel we can do some outreach activities and just, you know, make sure people know that the census forms have come out and it's important to complete them, and also our senior dining sites. So we have lots of stuff planned. I think we're just starting for it to be busy and active right now, but we're really trying to the best of our ability, make sure that the refugee population in particular feels comfortable completing the census and participates fully. Next slide, please. And this is just a picture. So this is actually our first census presentation. So the guy in the front is from the US Census Bureau locally, and the other person on the left is one of our case managers who's interpreting in Swahili and Somali. So that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much to all of our panelists. So I have a little less than 10 minutes for some Q&A. I've taken note of some of the questions that have come up in the chat and the Q&A, as well as some questions that were submitted in advance. So I'm going to try to package some of these, and I know we won't get to all of them today. So I'm sure you know, those of us who are on the webinar today can also answer questions individually. So one set of questions that I've seen come up a few times now is, you know, what is that line? What can caseworkers and others do in terms of assistance if folks come in to complete it on a computer, or if they're not literate, either in English or their own language, how to complete it in writing, what sort of interpretation would be available on the phone, those sorts of questions. And maybe I'll have Jenny kick it off with responses to some of those, and then see if Terry or Felicia has anything to add. But Jenny, could you respond to some of those?
Yes, that's a great question. So for over the phone, people can respond over the phone, and we do have the 12 non-English languages. I have it listed on one of my slides, and each of the languages will have their own separate lines, so they will be directly speaking to that translator, so they can respond through that. What was the other question again?
Yeah, so what if someone isn't literate in either English or their own language? Like, how much can a caseworker actually help someone with the census process?
So yes, you can help them by translating the materials, but you can't look at the information that the actual writing down, filling out the answers. So they can't look at them filling out the questionnaire itself. I think having a census taker of doing that for them will be fine if they can wait for someone to come to their house, if they feel better that way.
Okay, thanks. Felicia, have there been any strategies that you all have used so far to kind of balance? I know the census hasn't quite launched, but what have been some of the ways you all have been thinking about helping provide that education without completing it directly?
Yeah, so I think this is a something we haven't really focused on here in Onondaga County because they've been so focused on getting people out to do their outreach. So we're going to have to think about that a little bit because some of our, many of our clients are illiterate, even in their language of origin, and they have a really hard time writing in English. So I think interpretation will be really important, but we may need to connect with the Census Bureau and see if we can encourage them to send census takers to our site on a regular basis, because I think they're going to need additional help beyond just the interpretation. So this webinar kind of made me think about that, and that's my next step after we finish here is contacting the Census Bureau and seeing what we can work out in terms of really helping people who speak either a very unusual language or just aren't literate.
Yeah. And Jenny, is there anything you're able to share about the mobile assistance program, which I know is launching?
Yes, so the mobile questionnaire assistance, that's going to be launching around mid-March, actually after mid-March, around the 20th. And we will use the actual response rates, the ROM, I think. Rebecca has been sending that link out. So we're going to use that that link to see which census tracts will have the lowest response, and we'll send out census takers to host events or whatever, have iPads around to do to help people fill out their census.
Great. And so it sounds like, if folks connect with their partnership specialists and their complete count committees, that there might be some ways to get some of that mobile questionnaire assistance. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Great. One question that came up before the webinar, so in terms of questions that folks submitted in advance, I think would be helpful, is about asylees, the extent to which asylum seekers should complete the census, and then also a question about names. When refugees arrive, sometimes their names are spelled incorrectly in their government forms, and how to address that. Could you answer both of those, Jenny?
Yes, so for asylee seekers, they should complete the census if they arrive to America after April 1st. And then they should use the address where they're staying. And we do have a couple of initiatives where we are working with trusted voices like you guys. And we are focusing our messaging to any of those hard to count communities so that we can identify where those refugees and asylees are staying and helping to get out to those areas. And for the name part, so the Census Bureau, we do ask for first and middle last name of all the respondents, but a name is required to complete this 2020 census. However, if a respondent prefers not to provide a name, we ask that they provide a nickname or anything unique, a unique description, so that we will know, so they will know who each question is referring to if we need to call them to ask any incomplete information.
Great, thank you. One question I see that just kind of came in that I've also been curious about is, how will the Census Bureau know who to send to different households? So how will they know that, for example, a Swahili or Arabic enumerator is needed? Terry, do you have an answer to that? Otherwise, I can turn it over to Jenny.
Yes. We for the first phase of the 2020 Census Initiative, we did address canvassing, ad can, and through the address canvassing process and our national address list, we can count residents once and only once in the right place. So we have an idea of where our immigrant populations reside. And what we're doing here in Baltimore City, we're actually working with MEMA, or the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and our Complete Count Committee, which is housed at the Baltimore City Department of Planning. And they have interactive hard-to-count maps, and that's how we can identify where our immigrant residents reside and where we can count them.
Got it. Yeah, and there's a little bit of an echo, so I hear you saying that in some of the prep work that was done in mapping households, you were able to get a sense of where those language needs might be. But Jenny, is there anything else? Let's say someone goes to someone's door and they realize they don't have the language capacity as needed. Is there a possibility to send someone back who has that language capacity?
Yeah, definitely. So the census taker will have a this list of all the 59 languages we have in that language, and someone can point out, hey, I speak this language. So the census taker will come back, report this to their supervisor, and come back with someone that speaks that language, or they can point to the number that they can call if they speak one of the 12 languages.
Great. And that might also help with some of the literacy barriers, correct? So someone can, you know, if they have that language resource, then they can give their answers verbally to the census taker.
Yes.
Great. I did see I have one clarification question. You know, I think you did mean to say that asylum seekers who arrived by April 1st, 2020, those are folks who should be counted. No one arriving after April 1st, but as long as you're here by April 1st, 2020, you should be accounted. That's correct, right?
Yes, 2020.
Yeah, April 1st, 2020, before April 1st. Great. And I guess for my last question, and I think this came up in Terry's presentation about group quarters enumeration, which pertains to a lot of different folks, from college students to others, and it actually does pertain to the question that just came up from Megan Kennedy about folks who are detained and how that will work. So Jenny, can you talk about that process?
Yes, so the Census Bureau will count detained people regardless of the reason for their detention through group quarters operation. So for the purposes of the decennial census, there is no distinction between a person who is detained as an immigrant without legal status and a person who is part of a recent influx of immigrants at the border. So we will work together with those areas to get that count.
Great, thank you. Next slide. I know that there were a lot of questions that we can get to today. Can connect with Meg and the team at Switchboard to talk about other resources and things to help answer some of those questions. And I know Jenny provided her info. I'm happy to be connected as well. So we'll chat about getting some of those questions answered. So perhaps just as you wrap up today, I hope you're taking away some new ideas for census outreach and engagement. And I'll turn it over to Meg to close us out.
Thanks so much, Kristen. So yeah, please, we have this discussion question on here. What is one idea for census outreach or engagement that you're taking away today? Please feel free to reflect on that, type that out in the chat as we go through a final wrap up here. I'd like to quickly review our learning objectives. They were that by the end of today's webinar, you'd be able to answer frequently asked questions from clients about the census. So Kristen reviewed some of that, Jenny provided some of that, and then you heard a bit from Terry and Felicia about what they're doing in Baltimore and Syracuse to make that happen. That you'll also be able to describe why the census is important, including how it impacts federal funding for programs and services. As Kristen mentioned, marketing and messaging research showing that that's really key to help motivate people to complete it. And that you'll be able to name at least one idea for census outreach, education that you can incorporate into your work with clients. So really seeing several of those come into the chat as well. Feel free to review the responses provided by your fellow participants on today's webinar for additional ideas. I want to conclude today with our contact information. You have this. We will, like Kristen mentioned, follow up with anyone who was interested in getting their question answered, but we didn't have time to cover today. So we will work to email you out the answer if you provided that when typing it in. And then you can find Switchboard in general at this information here, our email, our social media, and our website. One thing I want to make sure I plug before we close up is please do complete our feedback survey. So that will be open either already in your browser or will open when you close the Zoom screen today, and Rebecca will likely drop that link into the chat. That survey is so helpful to us when we work to improve our trainings in the future. With that, I think I will wrap up and close today's webinar. I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists today, Jenny Aramony, Amber Mull, Kristen Aster, Terry Fisher, and Felicia Castricone. So great hearing from you all and providing your insights on this important topic. And then of course, a huge thank you to participants for joining. Looking forward to seeing you all on another webinar in the future.